and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, we're going to dive into a question that sits right at the fault line between love, power, and erotic identity. This is going to be one of those topics that really gets missed because everything looks fine on the surface, but underneath, something important isn't quite landing. Today's show is brought about by a friend of mine down in Australia, down in Tasmania. I definitely appreciate it. So when he asked me this question, literally about attachment styles, I started thinking about it, and I've done shows on the past, so I'm going to approach this one today a little bit differently. Now, as always, before I get into that, I want to pause and say thank you, because all of you, whether you've been listening since the early days and those shows that were kind of terrible in the beginning and short, or you just found the show recently, this show has now passed 80,000 downloads. That's not a number I gloss over. And that's all because of you all listening, tuning in, asking questions, sending me responses from all over the world. I'm going to get to some of those. I'm really genuinely grateful for the time and trust and attention you all give this work. So if you're new here, welcome. This space is about speaking plainly about our kink, our trauma, our identity, our power, our relationships that doesn't always fit some sort of clean template, right? And if you want to like and subscribe and follow the show on Spotify, if you're on the app, hit those 5 stars. That way other people can keep finding these conversations. If you're following me on YouTube as well, like, subscribe, hit that little button so that way you're always updated when the new shows come out. And if you're on Apple, all right, do me a favor, keep rating the show, keep driving it up, right? We want to make this show number 1 for everybody around the world looking to find the answers here. And for some of those you've asked me, how do you support the show? There is a donation link in the show's description. It helps keep these conversations going and allows me to keep showing up consistently for you all. So every little bit of support is appreciated. All right. Now, before I get into all of this today, and ironically, this was driven by a friend of mine who happens to be in this country, I want to take a moment and I want to acknowledge something heavier before we move on. In the last couple of days, there was a really violent attack at Bondi Beach in Australia. Now, events like that have a way of cutting through routine and reminding us how fragile the sense of safety we rely on can be. So my thoughts are with those who are harmed, their families that are mourning, and the community that is still holding all of that shock and grief. And if you're listening from Australia, or if this even lands close to home for you, I want you to name that before continuing, right? We need to pay our respects and understand it was a terrible thing. All right. Today's episode is titled Structure Does Not Equal Safety. Now, what I want to explore is how structure, the rules, the roles, negotiated dynamics can feel stabilizing without actually providing emotional safety. And all of these little things in between, especially in DS and power exchange, because it's easy to assume that clarity and consistency equal security. And often they don't. And I think a lot of people miss this. Sometimes they simply mistake distance that's, easier to maintain. So this episode isn't about diagnosing attachment styles or telling you how to do kink correctly. It's about slowing down and asking what actually creates safety between people and what only creates the appearance of it. So let's get into it. Why does structure feel so convincing? That's the premise here. Now, one of the reasons structure feels so compelling in kink is because it actually works, even especially at first. Protocols, the rules, the roles, the expectations, all of that does something very real to the nervous system. Now, first, it reduces uncertainty. It answers questions before they have a chance to even be asked. It gives people a sense of orientation in a space that can otherwise feel emotionally loud or confusing. So when you know who you are, or who the other person is and how the interaction is supposed to go, your body's going to settle down. There's less guessing, there's less scanning, there's less waiting for that other shoe to drop. That's not imaginary, that's regulation. Now, power exchange here adds another layer to this. In a lot of relationships outside of kink, things are vague. Now, people say they want closeness, but they don't define it. They say they want honesty, but punish it. They want commitment, but then guess what? They resist that structure. So that ambiguity is stressful. Now, DS, by contrast, often says the quiet parts out loud: who leads, who follows, what's expected, what isn't, and what the edges are. It's very clear and very cut. As a matter of fact, there was a show that I watched. There was a podcast I watched with, or a video. This was quite a few years ago about, or with Esther Perel, and she was sitting with a psychologist in, I think it was a psychologist or a therapist from New York area somewhere. I can't recall, but they were talking about DS, and they had both agreed on one thing, that there is a lot of things that our lifestyle can teach the vanilla world, right? And it's really important because we lay out a lot more things up front than we do when we're spending 6 months to 9 months in the vanilla world getting to know someone, right? Our clarity is a little bit more straightforward. And that clarity here does feel like relief, especially for people coming out of chaotic or emotional inconsistent relationships. After unpredictability, anything predictable feels like growth. It even feels like maturity, right? It feels like we're finally figuring something out. And in some ways, that's true. Learning to articulate needs and limits and desires is actually growth. Negotiation with your partner, that's growth. Being intentional, that's growth. But here's where the confusion creeps in. Regulation feels like safety, especially after all of the chaos. So when your nervous system has been on high alert for a long time, calm can even feel profound. Silence can even feel like peace. Order can even feel like care. So when the dynamic runs smoothly, when, all these rules are followed, when, no one's rocking the boat, it's easy to assume that means the connection itself is solid. But here's the catch: structure doesn't ask very much of you emotionally. You can follow rules without being vulnerable. You can maintain a role without being known. You can even perform consistency without ever risking closeness, right? I had structure in the military. I had structure in some of my relationships in the past. I've had structure in a lot of the jobs I've done, but I didn't have to connect to them. I just had to do them, right? Now, none of this is a criticism. It's just an observation. For a lot of people, especially those returning to kink after a rough period, structure feels like proof that they're doing better. They've learned something, that they're not repeating all these old patterns. And again, sometimes that is true. Other times, it's just a different way of managing the same discomfort. Because what structure does best here is limit exposure. It narrows the field for us, right? It tells you where to stand and what to do. And once things, stay within those lines, nothing unexpected happens. There's no emotional surprises, there's no demands you didn't agree to, and there's no moments where you have to decide how much of yourself you've got to reveal. And for a lot of people, that's really comforting. However, it's incomplete. The problem isn't that structure exists. The problem is when structure becomes the substitute for safety instead of a container of it. So when the absence of conflict gets mistaken for trust and calm gets mistaken for connection, this is when problems start to develop. So you can feel regulated in a dynamic and still be emotionally distant. So you can even be steady, and here's the big one, but still be alone in it. So this is why I'm careful about how people talk about safety in kink spaces. Safety isn't just about the rules being followed or the scenes going as planned. It's about what happens when something goes off script, when someone pulls back or something shifts or the dynamic asks for more than was originally negotiated. Structure handles the predictable parts really well. Safety shows up in how people respond to the unpredictable ones. And that distinction matters here because if you don't see it, It's easy to build something that looks healthy and can actually feel calm, but it never really brings you closer to the other person. And that's the issue. So let's talk about this false sense of safety in well run dynamics. Now, one of the harder things to talk about in all of our kink spaces, and this is the world over, is that a dynamic can be very well run and not emotionally safe. And that's where I want to be careful here, because when I say that, people sometimes hear criticism when there actually isn't any. I'm not talking about abusive dynamics, right? And I'm not even talking about unethical behavior. I'm talking about relationships that look functional and they feel calm and still quietly avoid the emotional contact. And this is where things get uncomfortable because calm is persuasive. When nothing is blowing up, when expectations are met, when scenes go ahead as planned, it's easy to assume that means everything underneath is solid. But calm is not evidence of closeness. And we mistake that all the time. Sometimes it's actually evidence of avoidance working exactly as intended. And from a psychological standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. Avoidant and fearful attachment patterns are not about the chaos, they're about the control. They develop in environments where closeness was unreliable or intrusive or even unsafe. So the nervous system learns something very specific: stay regulated, stay competent, stay contained, do not need too much, and definitely don't show too much. Now, put that nervous system into a structured dynamic. A well negotiated DS relationship offers predictability and role clarity and limits on emotional demand. For someone with avoidant tendencies, that can feel like relief. There's a script here, there's expectations, there's even a clear lane to stay in, and you can participate fully without having to improvise emotionally. But conflict avoidance fits neatly inside of this. If everyone follows the rules, there's no reason to argue. If discomfort gets reframed as a protocol, issues or, you know, timing, it's never really become an emotional conversation. The harmony gets preserved, but it's a surface harmony. Nothing disruptive ever gets named. And consistency in roles play a part here too. Someone can be very present as a dominant or be a reliable submissive and be very attentive with the structure of the dynamic and still emotionally distant as a person. Both of those things can exist. The role becomes the point of contact, not the individual behind it. This is where you start to see people feeling held without being known. Being held is regulating, it feels good, right? It settles your body. Being known is different. Now, being known requires you to be exposed. It means letting someone see the parts of you that aren't tidy or impressive or even useful. It means allowing unpredictability into a connection. And psychologically, avoidance systems are excellent at first, at the first part and resistant to the second. And again, this is not about a moral failing here. This is a strategy and one that often worked in the past. So we've learned it, we've adapted to it. It's if closeness led to disappointment or being overwhelmed, guess what? Distance became safety, right? Structure just gives distance that respectable shape. Now, what complicates this in kink is that the relationship can still feel intimate. Power exchange creates intensity, right? All of the scenes become emotional, and then there's the caretaking that can be really, that can be real. But intensity is not the same thing as intimacy. Emotional arousal is not the same thing as emotional availability. You can share vulnerability that's contained within a scene while keeping your day to day emotional world private. You can offer devotion in a role while staying guarded as a person. And because everyone, feels regulated, no one questions it. And this is why well run dynamics can be the hardest to examine. Nothing is obviously wrong. There's no crisis forcing reflection. The system works. And when the system works, people protect it. But here's the line I want, to land clearly. Nothing feels safer than a system that never asks you to show up emotionally. If the dynamic never requires repair, never surfaces disappointment, never creates moments where someone has to say, I'm pulling back, or I need more, or this doesn't just even feel good, then it's maybe not as safe as you're experiencing. And it may be emotional absence here that feels more comfortable. Real safety isn't the absence of friction, it's the presence of responsiveness. It shows up when things shift, not just when things are smooth. Any, you know, all dynamics can be ethical. They can be consensual and negotiated and still avoid that emotional contact. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It does mean it's limited. And limitations matter if what you want is connection, not just regulation. And here, then, the question isn't, does the dynamic work? The question is, what does it protect you from feeling? So now that we're starting to see this, how avoidant, and fearful patterns use this structure. So when an avoidant or fearful pattern show up inside of kink, they rarely announce themselves as avoidance. They show up as competence, right? Control, restraint, being low maintenance, as not needing a lot. And because kink values intention and self awareness, those traits are often get praised rather than questioned. This is why it's important to say this clearly. These patterns are not defects, they're strategies. They formed in response to environments where closeness came with a risk. And at one point, it probably worked. They kept you, intact. And that does matter. But what worked once doesn't always serve you later. And one of the most common patterns is distance without explanation. If someone pulls back emotionally, or they become quieter or not, less available or harder to reach, but nothing is named, there's no rupture on the surface, so there's nothing to repair. The distance just becomes the new normal. Now, structure makes this easy, and the protocol then continues. The roles stay intact, right? Those scenes even still happen. So, from the outside, everything looks stable, but internally, that connection has thinned out. But there's no language for it because nothing technically is broken. So, control without intimacy is another version of this. Control can feel grounding, it can organize experience, it can create a sense of safety through predictability, but control does not require emotional exposure. You can even lead, direct, decide, contain without ever letting someone see you uncertainty, right? Your fear, your needs. You can hide all that from them. And in psychological terms, this is regulation without, reliance. Your nervous system stays calm because it never had to depend too deeply on anyone else. So service without vulnerability shows up a lot. People give, they show up reliably, they anticipate needs, they're attentive to their roles. But what they don't do is ask. They definitely don't reach. They don't risk disappointment by wanting something that isn't already guaranteed. So service becomes a way to stay connected while staying protected. And you can be indispensable and still remain unseen. And that's going to hit hard because we have to start understanding that. I can be loyal and I can do all of these things, but you may never know what my fears are, what's going on inside. And this is where we now move into like the whole authority without emotional availability, because this is the other side of that coin. Someone can be steady and composed and consistent while remaining emotionally opaque. They're present, but only with the boundaries of the role. And their inner world definitely stays private. Their needs, they stay unspoken. And, their limits show up structurally, just not emotionally. Now, none of this is accidental. Fearful and avoidant attachment patterns are built around one core belief that closeness is always conditional and it can be withdrawn. It can cost you something. So the nervous system learns to minimize exposure while maximizing stability. Structure is perfect for that. The danger is not that these strategies exist. The danger here is when they go unexamined, when people confuse emotional restraint with strength. So when independence gets confused for security, when not needing anyone gets mistaken for being healed, these patterns definitely worked once. They help someone survive that whole unpredictability or inconsistency or even the emotional overload. But survival strategies don't automatically turn into relational skills just because the environment changes. And inside kink, they look especially convincing because everything is intentional. Everything is negotiated, it's consensual, but consent does not require emotional availability. And intention does not guarantee connection. So if a dynamic allows someone to stay distant without ever naming it, if rewards, self-containment without ever inviting responsiveness, then it may be reinforcing an old strategy rather than supporting growth. That doesn't mean the dynamic is wrong, it just means that it's doing something specific. And the question worth sitting with is whether that job still matches what you want now. So, what does emotional safety actually require in DS? When people talk about emotional safety in kink, they usually mean compliance. Rules are followed, limits respected, agreements are honored, and those things do matter. I'm not saying they don't, they're necessary, but they're not sufficient. They are the foundation, not the structure that people actually live inside of. Emotional safety is revealed when those things don't go smoothly. A dynamic that only feels safe when everything is working as planned is fragile. It depends completely on performance. The moment someone falters or pulls back, if they feel unsure or they need something different, the system doesn't even know what to do with that. So guess what? It gets avoided, it gets reframed, or worse, it gets contained. So real safety requires rupture and repair. That means moments where something feels off and someone's willing to say it, or moments where there's disappointment or confusion or misattunement, and the response is not punishment, withdrawal, or silence here, but engagement. And this is where a lot of well-run dynamics fail. Now, not because anyone is doing something wrong, but because the system was never built to hold that emotional mass, it was built to prevent it. Emotional availability is often mistaken for intensity, right? Long scenes, these deep drops, strong feelings, caretaking after our play, right? Those things can be meaningful, but they don't automatically translate into availability. Emotional safety and or emotional availability shows up outside the scene. It shows up in how people respond to uncertainty, not arousal. And caretaking here can also be misleading. Someone can be excellent at managing another person's experience while remaining disconnected from their own. They can soothe, reassure, they can even support you without ever letting themselves be seen. So, care without exposure feels safe, but care with exposure feels risky. And negotiation plays a role here. Our lifestyle leans heavily on negotiation, and rightly so. It should be something we're starting to talk about in the first few weeks. Talking things through, setting all of our expectations, limits, medical stuff, all these things, all that matters. But negotiation can't replace presence. You can agree to a structure that never actually meets the emotional reality of the people inside of it. And no amount of clarity on paper can compensate for emotional absence in practice. And this is the line between ethical and connected, becomes important. A dynamic can be ethical and still emotionally thin. Consent can be clear and ongoing, and yet the relationship can lack responsiveness. Ethics protect people from harm, they don't automatically create intimacy. So consent is on the floor, we got to remember that. That's what it is. It's the structure we're building on. It's not the ceiling. Safety begins where consent ends, and it lives in ongoing, unscripted moments when someone says, hey, guess what? This feels different than I expected. And, or maybe I'm not sure where I am right now, and I need to slow down. And the other person doesn't retreat or tighten their control or even disappear. And in DS, this can feel especially vulnerable because power is involved. Naming emotional needs can feel like breaking a role. So if you're expressing uncertainty, that can sometimes feel like a failure. Repair can even feel like loss of authority or stability. But emotional safety is not the absence of power shifts at all. It's the ability to navigate them without threat. A safe dynamic allows space for emotional movement. It allows people to be steady without being rigid. And it allows roles to hold structure without suffocating the people inside of them. And psychologically, this requires tolerance for discomfort or ambiguity in the moments where regulation gives, way to contact. That's not something structure can provide alone. It has to be practiced between people. So when a dynamic can survive a misstep, a difficult conversation, or even a change in emotional availability without collapsing or turning cold, that's when safety becomes real. Not because everything is perfect, but because nothing has to be hidden to keep it intact. And that's the difference worth paying attention to, that we don't pay attention to enough. And this is where I want to now talk about returning to kink with awareness. Because coming back to kink with more awareness can feel oddly unsettling. People expect insight to make things clearer, right? If that's what's going to happen, they want it to be calmer, but often it does the opposite at first. You notice everything more, you feel more. Things that once felt exciting or comforting now register completely different. And that's going to be a little bit confusing because you may find yourself pulling back sooner than you used to. Not because something is wrong, but because you're seeing patterns earlier. Dynamics that once felt grounding now feel flat, and interactions that used to feel intense now feel scripted. That doesn't mean you're broken or avoidant or incapable of connection. It means your perception has just changed. And a lot of people mistake this moment for regression. They think that, I was more open before, or I was more connected before, but openness without awareness often comes at a cost. What's happening now is not a collapse. It's discernment. And awareness increases sensitivity. You're no longer responding to stimulation or regulation. You're responding to meaning, and meaning takes longer to settle for someone. This is where discomfort enters. Growth rarely announces itself. More often, it shows up like friction, restlessness, as a sense that something familiar no longer fits the same way. And that can feel lonely, especially in a space that, that fries of enthusiasm and readiness for all of us. So returning with awareness often means that we have to tolerate those pauses, not rushing, to fill the gaps. You have to let yourself sit with uncertainty instead of, immediately trying to structure it away. That's not avoidance, that's restraint. And you may also find that your standards do shift. You're less willing to stay in dynamics that only work when everything's smooth. You're less willing to confuse calm connection, right? You're less willing to perform roles that keep you regulated but unseen. That narrowing can feel like loss, fewer options, fewer matches, even fewer places where you feel at ease. But it's also a form of alignment. You're not pulling away from kink, you're pulling towards something more honest within it. And growth often looks like discomfort before it looks like ease, right? That's true emotionally and relationally. The nervous system has to adjust to new cues, right? We're not replacing the old framework you had, we're creating a new one next to it. Old strategies just don't disappear overnight, they loosen gradually. And if you're in this phase, there's nothing to fix. There's no decision you need to force. Awareness isn't a mandate to act, it's just an invitation to observe. So, returning to kink doesn't have to mean repeating the old patterns with better language. It can mean slowing down enough to notice what actually creates safety for you now. Not what used to work, not what looks good on paper, but what holds up when you're no longer hiding from yourself. And that's not a small shift, it's a quiet one, and it matters. If a dynamic here only feels safe when you don't need as much from it, that's worth paying attention to. Not with judgment, not with urgency, just honesty. Safety depends on self-silencing. It isn't safety at all. It's management. Structure does have its place. Roles absolutely are meaningful. And power exchange can be grounding, connective, and deeply intimate. None of that is being argued here. It's not what I'm saying. But structure is not a substitute for emotional presence. And when we confuse the two, we can stay regulated while slowly disappearing inside of a relationship. And many people learn early that being easy to be with is the safest way to stay connected. Don't ask too much. Don't feel too loudly. Don't disrupt what's working. Now, over time, that strategy can look like maturity, strength, or independence, but it often costs in responsiveness, the ability to be met where you actually are. Emotional safety isn't proven by how smoothly things run. It shows up in how much room there is for change, for disappointment, or for repair, or in the moments when someone needs more than the structure was designed to hold. And a dynamic can be ethical and consensual and still not nourish you. That doesn't make it wrong, it does make it incomplete. And incompleteness has a way of catching up with people, usually in quiet ways at first. Look, you don't have to tear anything down to notice this. You don't have to make decisions today. Awareness isn't a demand, it's a pause, a chance to stop performing safety and start noticing where you actually feel it. So here's the question I'm going to leave you all with, like I do every week. Now, last week I got a lot more answers to my question, but I didn't hit my goal of 20. And I want to say thank you from the person from Estonia. Got your question. Loved it. Glad you emailed me. I do know where it is, right? Very worldly, by the way. I'm very familiar with a lot of countries around the world. I got a question, or I got a response from, let's see, I got 2 emails from Costa Rica. I got a couple responses from the States and somewhere else. I can't recall because I don't have the email in front of me. And there was a couple comments online. But that wasn't my 20. And there's a lot of you who listen. Now, if you don't want to comment publicly, that's fine. I'm okay with that. Email me. I want to see your responses to this. So here's the question, right? Where in your dynamics are you relying on structure to avoid being seen? I want 20 of you at least this week. Talk about it. This is the moment that you talk about it. This is the moment we say it, right? Sit with it. You don't need to answer it today. You don't need to answer it right away, right? Got a whole week. Sit with it. Now, a couple of other things I want to get to real quick. Christmas is coming. I have one more show left, 50th show, 50th episode this year. That'll be next week. I am desperately trying to get the forensic psychologist on. We are just having a scheduling conflict, and I am trying to work out best what's going to work for her. I am so want to bring her on to talk about relationships and a couple of other things, something different that I've had on the show. So it's going to be interesting. I'm going to put Hi There Catsuit on in the new year. That's more my fault. It has nothing to do with him. He's been great. He's totally understanding. He's got his own show, right? If you haven't checked it out, you need to go over there and check it out, right? Um, I'm probably gonna be doing stuff for about another week and a half. The show will then, after next week, I'll do my final wrap. That'll go up. It's not really a 51st. Well, it's technically a 51st episode, but it'll be my year-end wrap up. So I want to do that, and then that's it. And then I'm going to take a couple of weeks off. The show will restart in January. Probably, I don't know, a couple weeks in. I just need some time. I want to come up with some new things. I want to start planning out. I also want to hear from you all. Do you want some more interviews on the show? I haven't done a lot this year. Kind of realized that. I looked back. I got Red Warrior on. Hi There Catsuit. I need to get him on. And then there's a couple of others. And I've done my first show with somebody else. Actually, it was his, which I was really happy about. But do you all want some more interviews? Let me know, right? That can be separate. You can throw that as a caveat to your response to my question, right? I want to hear. It's Christmas time. It's the holidays. So first, happy holidays to all of you and yours and your family and your loved ones and those people you hold close, right? Whoever they may be. I'm not going to do You're Famous now. If they want to keep complaining, it's end of the year. I'm in a Christmassy mood. You know, it's cool outside. Christmas tree is up. Lights are out. That's the thing I'm going to focus on. Happy stuff going into the end. So I'm really, really happy about that. I'm just going to let the You're Famous now go until next year. Right? Next year, the Kink Perspective enters its 5th year in production. Wow. 5 years. Thank you all for being here along this journey. Um, I am still, yes, kind of maybe looking for somebody who wants to sponsor the show. Wouldn't mind it. But right now, I'm also balancing that between keeping it independent because I don't want rules here. Right? I like to talk about what we talk about. But, everything costs. It's the way of the world. Think about what I said today, right? And I hope to you, my friend, this answers your question. This speaks to you in a different way. I see the heart of what you were asking me. And it's okay. You can wrestle with these things, whether they were partially yours or partially the relationship, one of the relationships you were in. But just look, don't carry it, start to understand. Because that's where you start making some peace. And that's what this is all about. Um anyway, no promos, no nothing today, guys. Just sit with this question. Sit and look and be honest with yourselves. It's okay. Maybe this is, we're coming to the start of a new year. Part of your change about being honest and what you need for yourself or your dynamics or where you want to show up. So hit me up in the socials. Let me know what you think. Talk to me about the show. 20 of you at least around the world. I want to hear from you. I'd love more, but I want to hear from at least 20 of you, right? That's all I'm asking. 20 people respond to it. Email, social media, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, doesn't matter. Put your comments there. Let's talk about it. Because let me tell you, when you all open up, you help other people to open up. This isn't about me. This is about all of you supporting each other. That's what this is all about. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.